So you talked a lot about purpose. I want to explore that for a minute, because there's a story in society, a narrative, that the only legitimate purpose of a business is to make money for its shareholders. And I know you're a shareholder in Whole Foods. And what's wrong with that story as you see it?
It's an interesting question. First, you have to ask the question, I mean, where'd that narrative come from? I think it's a myth. And who has the right to define what the purpose of a business is anyway? I don't think it's economists teaching at universities that have the right to define that a business must attempt to maximize profits. I do think that's come out of economic theory. But businesses are started by entrepreneurs, and I have known hundreds of entrepreneurs in my life. With only a few exceptions did those entrepreneurs start their businesses primarily to maximize profits for their shareholders. Of course they wanted to make money, but that's not really what was driving them. What was driving them, in most cases, was some type of passion. They were on fire about something. It could be from wanting to, like Bill Gates, to create software that would do the personal computer revolution. It could be the passion I felt with Whole Foods, which was to sell healthy, natural, organic foods to people. There are all kinds of different purposes that can exist. And I believe the entrepreneur who creates the business is the first one who determines what the purpose of the business is. Over time, I do think that purpose evolves or co-evolves through interactions with the different stakeholders, the customers, the employees, the investors, the suppliers, the larger community all impact the business and help co-evolve the purpose. But I do think it's a myth that the only legitimate function of business is to maximize profits or shareholder value. It's such an interesting perspective, Ed, because that's not the purpose of a doctor, and it's not the purpose of a teacher, and it's not the purpose
hopefully
of...
not.
No, I mean, they have ethical codes. I mean, a doctor takes an oath, and they want to heal people, and teachers want to educate people. Architects want to design buildings. Why is it that we think business refers back to this rather narrow, selfish interpretation of why it exists?
So what happened, or what happened so that we do think that way? So I do think that myth, I agree with you, it's a myth, but it has some reality in society. You hear a lot of people out saying things like, and profits are bad somehow. That goes with the myth. How did that go wrong?
Well, I don't know exactly how it went wrong. I mean, you have to be an economic historian. But if you look at Adam Smith's initial work, he didn't see it that way. But I do think we were caught up in an industrial age, and as we began to make progress through capitalism, in some ways we had kind of a mechanistic model where you had you take the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, combine those together, and profits spit out. And that was sort of unprecedented in the whole history of our world. And I think in a lot of ways people got caught up with the romance of that you could have a perpetual motion machine. This business could continue to produce profits which would be reinvested in growth, and then more profits would be produced. And so we were sort of fascinated with that fact, and I do think the economists primarily in the 19th century began to create models of the economy that assumed that. They took a very narrow perspective of human nature, that we were these self-maximizers, self-interest maximizers, and businesses therefore were profit maximizers, and it made their models work. And so they began to teach that in their economic textbooks. And then the culture, and then the enemies of capitalism, such as the Marxists and the socialists, began to stereotype businesses as only interested in profit.
So it might be if you actually reread the businesses that were created from the lens of saying, well, I bet those businesses created some value for customers, for their employees, and for their investors, and maybe for their suppliers and communities too. It might be an interesting rereading of what happened over time. Because we read the history of capitalism from this kind of story that doesn't work anymore, the shareholder-centric economic-centric story.
I totally agree. I think that that has been an interpretation that's been written in to businesses. Again, I've known a lot of entrepreneurs, and I got to talk to Bill Gates a couple of years ago now, and talked about why he started Microsoft. And it wasn't to become the richest man in the world. I mean, he was on fire about, he thought the personal computer revolution was going to transform the world, and that eventually everybody would own a personal computer. And of course, he wanted to write the software for it. And that was his passion, and he was right in predicting what would happen in the world. And as a result, he became wealthy. But that's not why he did it. That wasn't the purpose of it. It was a sort of a happy result of it that Microsoft became so successful and he became so wealthy. But I do think that this mythology does great damage to the brand of business, because people end up thinking business is only about money. It's only about profit. I constantly have to battle this stereotype that Whole Foods is only about profit, only about money. And it really harms business, legitimacy, I think, in society.